The tow hook clanged against the rusted bumper of the old pickup truck. Evelyn Carter stood on the marble steps of the glass tower, her voice flat and final. "Tow it." The man beside the truck did not argue. He watched in silence as the cable tightened, then walked away without a word. Later that same morning, on the top floor of that same tower, her entire board went pale. A name had just been spoken in the conference room. The name of the man whose truck she had just ordered gone. The morning had started the way every morning started for Evelyn Carter. Black coffee at 5:45, a 12-minute commute through the quieter side streets of downtown, the same parking spot beneath the glass tower that bore her company's name in brushed steel. By the time the city began to wake, she had already read 3 briefings, approved 2 wire transfers, and ignored 1 call from a man she had stopped returning calls to 8 months ago. Carter Equity was about to close the largest deal in its 14-year history. $2 billion routed through a joint venture with a firm called Halberd Holdings. Every analyst on the 34th floor had spent the last 6 weeks pulling 16-hour days to get the paperwork ready. Signing was scheduled for 11 o'clock. Evelyn wanted the building calm, the lobby spotless, and nothing, absolutely nothing out of place when the Halberd delegation walked through the front doors. So when she stepped out of her car at 7:41 and saw an old pickup truck idling in the executive bay, something inside her went very still. The truck was the color of rust and dust, a ladder rack across the bed, a toolbox strapped behind the cab. It did not belong in front of the glass tower. It belonged at the edge of a job site, or parked behind a warehouse, or anywhere other than the space reserved for the people who ran this building. The driver was standing a few feet from the vehicle, a small equipment case in one hand, scanning the loading entrance, as if he had simply taken a wrong turn looking for it. He wore a plain work jacket, faded jeans boots that had seen real use. Nothing about him asked for attention. Nothing about him suggested he expected to be noticed at all. Evelyn noticed. She walked past him without breaking stride, pulled the phone from her coat pocket, and made the call to building security before she reached the revolving door. "There's a vehicle in my bay," she said. "Tow it." She did not raise her voice. She did not look back. Her tone carried the weight of someone who had given the same order 100 times before about 100 different things and had never once been questioned. The man beside the truck turned his head when he heard the cable hook engage. He watched the tow truck lift the front end of the old pickup. He did not argue. He did not shout. But his eyes moved once briefly toward the revolving door of the glass tower and caught the back of the woman in the dark coat just before the doors closed behind her. He read the name in brushed steel across the front of the building. He read it slowly, the way a person reads something he intends to remember. Then he set the equipment case down on the curb and took a long breath that no one was close enough to hear. Evelyn was already inside already on the elevator, already halfway to the 37th floor. She had forgotten him before the doors closed. Julian Brooks watched the rusted bumper swing up into the air. He ran a hand along his jaw, then reached for his phone, called the client on the 18th floor, and told them the delivery would have to be rescheduled. He said it without edge, without complaint. Some people read silence as weakness. Julian had learned a long time ago that silence was often the only honest answer a person could give. He picked up the case, walked 2 blocks east, and disappeared into the kind of life that did not leave footprints. He did not own a social media account. He did not answer unknown numbers. He kept a small workshop on the far side of the river and took contracts only when they interested him. The world he had come from, the world of corner offices and quarterly calls, had cost him more than he was willing to lose a second time. Upstairs, the glass tower moved through its morning like a machine that had forgotten how to slow down. By 10 o'clock, the boardroom on the 37th floor had filled. The Halberd delegation was not due until 11, but Evelyn wanted a final pass through the contract before the signing. The atmosphere in the room was calm on the surface and tight underneath. Richard Hale, the chairman, sat at the far end of the long walnut table with his reading glasses pushed halfway down his nose. He had signed off on the deal 3 weeks ago and had not looked at the paperwork since. Margaret Shaw, head of legal, stood at a side console with 4 binders open in front of her. She was the kind of attorney who read every footnote twice and trusted no one's summary, and she had been reading this contract for 31 days. Evelyn took her seat at the head of the table and opened the final draft. "Walk me through the structural summary," she said. Margaret began. The terms of the joint venture, the capital contribution schedule, the governance rights, the exit provisions. Everything was standard. Everything was clean. Everything had been negotiated down to the comma. Until Margaret reached page 142. She stopped there, not because something was wrong, but because something did not make sense. A subclause buried inside the capital adjustment section, a trigger tied to a debt-to-equity ratio. The language was correct on its face. The math appeared valid, but the way the clause interlocked with 2 other provisions on pages 86 and 93 created a structure she could not fully map. She read it again, then a 3rd time. Then she set down her pen. "I need a moment on page 142, Margaret said. Evelyn looked up. Richard Hale lowered his glasses. Margaret explained carefully that there was a linkage she did not understand, and that if she did not understand it, she was not willing to recommend signature. The room temperature dropped by several degrees. Evelyn asked for clarification. Margaret admitted she could not give it. The clause was too well written to be an accident, and too strange to be standard. Someone had designed it to look invisible. One of the analysts seated along the wall cleared his throat. Daniel Reed was 31 years old, quiet, and almost never spoke in senior meetings. He had been hired out of a smaller firm 2 years earlier, and he knew things about the industry that nobody at Carter Equity had ever asked him about. He raised his hand halfway, then lowered it, then spoke anyway. "I've seen a structure like this once before," Daniel said. Every head at the table turned toward him. He did not enjoy the attention. 4 years ago, a pension fund in Charlotte almost signed something that looked nearly identical. Same trigger mechanism, same dual-linked language. Richard Hale leaned forward. And Daniel's voice lowered. And there was one analyst who caught it. He wrote a 12-page memo nobody else at his firm understood. He left the industry the following spring. Evelyn kept her face still. What was his name? Daniel hesitated, because part of him already suspected why she was asking, and part of him already knew the answer. "Julian Brooks," he said. The room went very quiet. Margaret Shaw closed the binder in front of her with the slow, deliberate motion of someone who had just understood something she did not want to understand yet. Evelyn sat back in her chair. She did not move for a long moment. She was not thinking about the contract. She was thinking about a rusted pickup truck in her executive bay at 7:41 in the morning, and a man standing beside it in a work jacket and faded jeans, and the way he had said nothing when she had given the order. She had walked past him without looking twice. She had dismissed him before he could matter. The Halberd delegation would arrive in 47 minutes. The contract on the table was worth $2 billion, and the only person in the world who could tell her what was actually hidden inside page 142 was a man whose truck she had just sent to an impound lot across town. Evelyn Carter rose from her chair and walked to the window behind the head of the table. The city below looked the same as it had an hour ago. She stood with her back to the room and said, "Postpone the signing by 3 hours." Richard Hale began to object. She did not turn around. "Tell Halberd the legal team has flagged a standard review item. Be polite. Be brief. Buy me 3 hours." Margaret Shaw was already on her phone calling the Halberd liaison. Daniel Reed sat very still, aware that he had just set something into motion that he could not take back. Evelyn turned from the window and asked him one question. "Where does Julian Brooks live now?" Daniel shook his head. "I don't know. Nobody does. He left the industry clean. No LinkedIn, no directory listing. I heard he does contract work for small firms. That's all I heard." She walked out of the boardroom without another word. Back in her own office, she closed the door and stood at her desk for a moment, with both hands flat against the surface. Her assistant was already pulling archived records from the firm where Julian had worked 4 years ago. Evelyn picked up her phone and made 3 calls in rapid succession. The first 2 gave her nothing. The third gave her a last known mailing address on the east side of the river. She reached for her coat. The rusted pickup truck came back to her like a photograph dropped on a table. She saw the ladder rack. She saw the toolbox. She saw the man in the work jacket standing a few feet away, holding a small equipment case, waiting for no one. She had given the order without looking at his face. She could not remember his face. She tried on the walk to the elevator, and she could not. The impound lot was on the south side of the freeway. She had the driver stop there first. A clerk behind a scratched plexiglass window pulled up the record. The truck had been released 40 minutes ago. The owner had come in, paid the fee in cash, and driven it out. The clerk slid a carbon copy of the release form across the counter. The name printed at the top was Julian Brooks. The address below it matched the one her assistant had given her. Evelyn stared at the paper for a moment longer than she needed to. She folded it once, placed it in her coat pocket, and got back into the car. The address led her across the river and into a stretch of warehouses and small commercial buildings. Her driver slowed outside a low brick structure with a roll-up door half raised. A wooden sign above the entrance read simply, Brooks. No logo, no branding, just the name. She told the driver to wait. She walked up to the open door alone. The inside of the workshop was clean in a way she did not expect. Metal shelving along one wall, labeled and ordered. A workbench under a hanging lamp. The rusted pickup truck was parked just inside hood, up a toolbox, open beside the front wheel. Julian Brooks was standing at the bench, sleeves rolled, tightening a fitting on a piece of equipment she could not identify. He looked up when he saw her in the doorway. His expression did not change. He set down the wrench, wiped his hands on a rag, and waited. Evelyn stepped inside. The space smelled of oil and cold concrete. She did not know how to begin. She was not a woman who usually had to begin. People usually began for her. "Mr. Brooks," she said. He nodded once. "I know who you are." His voice was level. Not cold, not warm, just level. "I read the name on the front of your building this morning." She felt the words land. She did not flinch. She had spent 20 years teaching herself not to flinch. "I came to ask for your help." Julian folded the rag and set it on the bench. "That's a long way from where we started this morning." Evelyn reached into her bag and took out a bound copy of the contract. She set it on the corner of the workbench. "There's a clause on page 142, linked to 2 others on pages 86 and 93. Our legal team can't map it. I was told you saw something like it once before. 4 years ago. Charlotte." Julian looked at the contract without touching it. He did not pick it up. He did not open it. "I remember Charlotte." Evelyn waited. "I wrote a memo that nobody wanted to read." He looked at her then. "And I left the industry 6 months after that because the people who wrote that memo's opposite number were still being promoted. And I decided I didn't want to be in the business of explaining to grown adults why a trap was a trap." She held his gaze. "I'm not asking you to come back. I'm asking you to look at this once." He did not answer immediately. He walked to the other side of the bench, picked up a second rag, and wiped a spot on the surface that was already clean. "Miss Carter, do you know what I was delivering to the 18th floor of your building this morning?" She did not. "A calibration unit for a backup power system, $340 labor included. I was going to be in and out in 11 minutes. Evelyn said nothing. Instead, I spent 2 hours at an impound lot and paid $260 to get my truck back. He looked at the contract on the bench. "So when you walk in here and ask me for a favor, worth significantly more than that, I want you to understand something. I'm not going to pretend this morning didn't happen. And I'm not interested in a job. I'm not interested in a consulting fee. I'm not interested in being on your letterhead for a day." She absorbed it. Then what are you interested in? He considered the question. I'll look at the contract. Once. For 1 hour. Because whoever wrote page 142 is the same kind of person who wrote the Charlotte document. And I don't like those people walking around unchecked. That's the reason. Not your company. Not your deal. Not your signature. Evelyn nodded. It was the first time in a very long time that she had agreed to terms she had not set herself. She opened the contract to page 142 and turned it toward him. Julian pulled a stool over, sat down, and began to read. He read the way Margaret Shaw read. Slowly. Twice. Then back across to page 86, then forward to 93. He did not take notes. He did not ask for a pen. He simply read. 20 minutes passed. Evelyn stood at the edge of the bench, silent, watching him work. The air in the workshop had the stillness of a place where decisions were made without ceremony. She found herself for the first time that day paying attention to a detail that had nothing to do with the contract. The way he held a page by the corner, the small scar across the back of one hand, the fact that he did not rush. At 40 minutes and Julian's jaw tightened. He went back to page 142, then to a footnote on page 204 she had not noticed before. Margaret had not noticed it either. He ran a finger down the footnote, then across to the capital adjustment clause, then to the governance schedule, and she watched something in his expression settle. It wasn't satisfaction. It was the opposite. It was the quiet look of a man confirming something he had hoped he would not find. Miss Carter, he said. She stepped closer. This isn't standard sophistication. This was built. He turned the contract so she could see. Page 142 is the trigger. Page 86 is the ratio test. Page 93 is the governance handoff. On their own, any of these could appear in a legitimate joint venture. He tapped the footnote on page 204. But this is the hinge. Read the wording here. It redefines what constitutes a breach of ratio, not financial distress, not insolvency. A narrow technical event that, given the structure of your capital contribution schedule, will almost certainly occur within the first 18 months of the venture. She studied the footnote. And when it occurs, his voice dropped. When it occurs, governance rights transfer, not to Halberd directly, to a subsidiary entity named in a different appendix. I'd need another hour to trace who owns that subsidiary. But based on the pattern, I would guess it is an affiliate of Halberd, 3 steps removed with enough distance to avoid any regulatory noise. Evelyn felt the floor of the workshop become very solid beneath her feet. So the moment we sign, Julian looked at her. The moment you sign, you have 18 months to trip a wire that your own contribution schedule makes nearly impossible to avoid. And the instant you trip it, the controlling interest in the joint venture, which includes a significant share of your own platform, transfers to an entity you don't know the shape of. $2 billion of exposure. You will have paid them to take the keys. The phrase sat in the air. She read it on the page. She read it again. Then she closed the contract slowly. She did not say, "Thank you." Thank you was a small word, and what she felt in that moment wasn't small. She said, "How did you see it when nobody else did?" Julian shrugged. "Because I wrote one of these myself, a long time ago, for the wrong kind of client. And I've spent the last 4 years making sure I can recognize it in other people's work." There was a long stretch of quiet. Not awkward. Just full. Evelyn looked at the truck behind him still sitting under the raised roll-up door. She said, "About this morning." Julian shook his head once. "Don't." She waited. "Miss Carter, I don't need the apology. The apology doesn't cost you anything. If you want to do something about what happened this morning, change the way you move through people tomorrow. That's the only version of an apology that matters." Evelyn did not respond with words. She picked up the contract, placed it back in her bag, and took out a business card. She wrote a number on the back, her direct line, the one 3 people in the company had access to. She set it on the bench. "If you ever need anything." He looked at the card without picking it up. "I probably won't, but I'll keep it." She accepted that because there was nothing else to accept. She walked to the doorway. Before stepping out, she turned. "One more question, Mr. Brooks. If I take this back to my board and cancel the signing, Halbert will push hard. They will threaten. They will make calls. Is there anything I should know that isn't in the document?" Julian considered. "Yes. They will offer to redraft. They will say it was a misunderstanding. They will produce a cleaner version with warm smiles. Don't sign the cleaner version either. The people who built the first one are the same people who will build the second." She nodded, once turned and walked back to her car. Her driver did not ask where she had been. She did not tell him. On the ride back across the river, she took out the carbon copy of the impound release form from her coat pocket and looked at it again. Julian Brooks, a name she had not known at 7:41 that morning, a name that now held between itself and the signatures on page 204 the entire value of the company she had spent 14 years building. Back at the tower, she took the elevator directly to the 37th floor. Richard Hale was pacing at the end of the hall. Margaret Shaw was in the boardroom with her binders open. Daniel Reed was seated in the corner, trying not to be seen. The Halbert delegation had been sent back to their hotel. An hour earlier, told that a final compliance review had surfaced a last item and that the firm would be in touch within the day regarding next steps. Evelyn walked into the boardroom and set the contract on the table. She did not sit down. "We are not signing today." Richard's face changed. "Evelyn," she cut him off. "Page 142 is a trapdoor. Page 204 is the hinge. Governance transfers to an undisclosed affiliate within 18 months of execution. If we sign this, we hand them the company inside a year and a half." The room went completely still. Margaret reached for the document. Evelyn slid it toward her. "Trace the affiliate in the appendix. Find the ownership chain. Then we decide how we respond to Halbert." Margaret began opening binders. Richard sank into the chair at the head of the table. He put both hands over his face for several seconds, then lowered them. "Who found it?" Evelyn looked at him. "A man whose truck I had towed this morning. I'll explain later." Richard did not ask for more. He understood enough. The rest of the afternoon collapsed into a kind of quiet emergency. Halbert was notified that the signing would be postponed to the following week, pending final internal review. Thomas Ward, the lead negotiator on the Halbert side, accepted the delay with a smoothness that in hindsight confirmed everything. He did not push. He did not demand. He simply smiled on the phone and said they looked forward to reconvening. That smile told Evelyn more than any document could. It was the smile of a man who had been through this dance before, who had watched it almost work, who was already beginning to plan the redraft that Julian Brooks had warned her about. She hung up the phone, looked out the window of her office at the city beginning to soften into evening, and felt for the first time in 14 years of building this company the distinct sensation of how close she had come to losing it. And the only reason she had not lost it was because a man in a faded work jacket had stood in a workshop on the far side of the river, read her contract for 1 hour, and told her the truth with nothing to gain from saying it. The boardroom stayed lit until after 10 that night. Margaret Shaw traced the affiliate ownership chain across 4 jurisdictions and 3 shell entities. Every layer she peeled back confirmed what Julian Brooks had said in 1 hour in a workshop across the river. The governance handoff was not a drafting error. It was the entire point of the contract. The $2 billion was the bait. The joint venture was the mechanism. The affiliate on page 204 was the door through which Carter Equity would have walked out of its own building. Richard Hale did not go home. He sat at the end of the long walnut table with a cold cup of coffee in front of him and the contract open to the footnote Julian had found. He had signed off on this deal, He had recommended it to the board. He had told shareholders at the quarterly call that it would define the next decade of the company. He understood somewhere around 9 o'clock that night that he had come within 3 hours of presiding over the end of everything he had built his career on. Evelyn stood at the window of her office with the city laid out below her in rectangles of light. She did not turn on the overhead lamp. She did not sit down. She was thinking about the moment at 7:41 that morning when she had given an order without looking at a face, and about how the shape of her entire company had for the last 14 years been built on the assumption that speed was the same thing as accuracy. It was not the same thing. Speed without attention was just the fastest route to a mistake. She had been fast her whole career. She had been praised for it. She had built her name on it. And today, the only reason her name still meant something tomorrow was because a man she had dismissed without a second glance had refused for reasons of his own to let a trap close on a stranger. The next morning, she called a full leadership meeting at 7. She opened with one sentence: "We are restructuring the Halberd deal, and we are restructuring how this company evaluates risk." She did not raise her voice. She did not perform. She laid out the findings. Margaret presented the ownership chain. Daniel Reed, who had expected to be reprimanded for speaking up the day before, was instead asked to lead the internal review team. Thomas Ward from Halberd called at 9:15. Evelyn took the call herself. His voice on the other end of the line was warm, measured, and entirely unconcerned. He said he understood there had been a compliance flag. He said Halberd was more than willing to revise any language that gave her team concern. He said he would have a cleaner draft on her desk by the end of the week. Evelyn listened to all of it. When he finished, she said one sentence: "Mr. Ward Carter Equity is withdrawing from the joint venture. Send a cleaner draft to someone else." There was a silence on his end that lasted longer than any silence she had ever heard in a business call. Then he said very politely that he was sorry to hear it. He said he hoped they would find reasons to work together in the future. She said she did not. She hung up first. The withdrawal hit the markets by noon. Carter Equity's stock dropped 4% in the first hour. Analysts called it a shock. By end of day, 2 independent firms had begun asking quiet questions about Halberd Holdings. Within 48 hours, the first investigative piece ran in a trade publication outlining the affiliate structure that Margaret Shaw had mapped. Within 2 weeks, 3 other firms that had been in advanced talks with Halberd pulled out. The pattern became visible when someone had drawn the first line. Evelyn did not issue a press release taking credit. She did not give interviews. She did not name Julian Brooks to anyone outside the boardroom. When Richard Hale asked her privately whether she wanted to acknowledge the person who had saved them, she said no. He asked for nothing. Giving him something he didn't ask for is another way of not listening. Inside the company, things changed in smaller ways that did not make the news. The executive parking bay signs came down. Evelyn did not announce it. She simply had the signs removed one Saturday, and when people noticed on Monday, nobody asked her why. She began attending the analyst floor meetings on the 34th once a week, sitting in the back, not speaking, just listening. Daniel Reed noticed. Others noticed. The culture shifted by a few degrees. 3 weeks after the withdrawal, Evelyn drove herself to the east side of the river on a Saturday morning. She did not call ahead. She parked 2 blocks from the workshop and walked the rest of the way. The roll-up door was half raised the same as before. The rusted pickup truck was parked inside. The workshop smelled of oil and cold concrete. Julian Brooks was at the workbench, with a small motor partly disassembled in front of him. He looked up when her shadow crossed the floor. His expression did not change, which was by now something she had come to expect from him. She stayed in the doorway. She was wearing jeans and a plain coat. She had not come as a CEO. She had come as a person who owed a debt that could not be paid with money. "Mr. Brooks," he nodded. "Miss Carter." She stepped inside. "I wanted to tell you in person. We withdrew from the deal. Halberd has been taking on water ever since. 3 other firms pulled out after us." Julian picked up a small screwdriver and set it down. I saw the trade piece. She was not surprised he had seen it. I didn't use your name, she said. I wasn't going to. But I wanted you to know that the thing you warned me about didn't just stop at my company. Other people are safe now because you spent an hour reading a document for free. Julian looked at the motor on the bench. I didn't do it for other people. She waited. I did it because I don't like watching it happen twice. She nodded. She understood the difference. I'm not here to offer you a job. He almost smiled. That's the first useful sentence anyone from your side of the river has said to me in 4 years. She felt the flicker of something that was not quite humor, but was adjacent to it. She looked around the workshop, the shelves, the labels, the order. It was not the life she would have chosen. It was clearly the life he had chosen. I came to say one thing, she said. I gave an order that cost you $260 and 2 hours, and the only reason the math works in anyone's favor is because you are the kind of person who helped me anyway. She held the thought. I've been thinking about that for 3 weeks. I don't think I can undo what I did that morning. I can only do it differently next time. Julian picked up the screwdriver again. He fitted it into a screw head. That's the part that counts. It wasn't absolution. He was not a man who handed out absolution. It was acknowledgement, which was a smaller and more honest thing. She accepted it in the same spirit in which it was given. She looked at the pickup truck by the open door. The bumper still had a small dent from the tow hook. Did it damage anything? He followed her gaze. The bumper's cosmetic. The truck still runs. She nodded. She did not offer to pay for the repair. She understood now that the offer itself would have been a kind of insult. She stepped back toward the doorway. Before she left, she turned. Can I ask one thing? Julian looked up from the motor. You left the industry because you didn't want to keep explaining traps to people who didn't want to listen. He waited. What made you explain it one more time to me? He considered the question honestly. Because you came and asked. Most people don't. Most people, when something goes wrong, they send a lawyer. You showed up yourself. She accepted that. She walked out of the workshop into the thin November sunlight. She did not look back. Julian went back to the motor on the bench. Neither of them expected to see the other again, and both of them were at peace with that. Some encounters are not the beginning of anything. Some encounters are simply the thing that happened, which changes the person afterward. Evelyn Carter drove back across the river. She did not turn on the radio. She did not check her phone. She watched the city get larger through the windshield and thought about a morning 3 weeks earlier and a man in a faded work jacket and the narrow margin between the company she still had and the company she had almost thrown away. A judgment made too fast had nearly cost her everything. The correction had come from outside her system, from a person her system had been trained to overlook. She did not plan to forget it. That was the only version of a lesson that ever held. Do not judge a person by appearance, circumstance, or position. Real value, intelligence, experience, and character rarely sits where it is easiest to see. A judgment made too fast can cost a lifetime of work. And sometimes the person you overlook is the only one left who can tell you the truth.